Thank you for joining The Right Dose. We will take a trip through the science behind pesticide use in Florida agriculture.
Our goal is to educate pesticide applicators and the public in the critical areas of integrated pest management according to Florida regulations.
So, sit back, relax, and put your learning hat on as we discuss the right dose and how we can positively impact our environment, our economy, and our communities.
This program is the product of a collaborative effort between agriculture extension agents and specialists from the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Science. Thank you for being here with us again for another episode of The Right Dose. Today we're going to be studying Chapter 8, which is all about storage, disposal, and transportation of those pesticides that we're applying in the field. Why do we have to talk about this? First of all, it's part of your exam, so you have to study on it, and we're here to help. Second, we have a duty to adequately handle these pesticides according to the label. And third, we have also to protect the environment and others around us. Accidents happen. Even the most experienced applicator is going to have an accident just because the nature of human error. One of the things that we have to think about is what else we can do to secure those pesticides and avoid unnecessary exposure to us, to the public, to our families. So that's why we're studying up on the storage, transportation, and disposal. Again, we're studying up from this guide, which is the Applying Pesticides Correctly, a guide that we can find at the University of Florida IFAS bookstore, SM1. We're gonna put the address where you can order yours online, so it conveniently can get to your home and you can study with us and hopefully get a better passing grade at your restricted use pesticide license for Florida. So let's start with Lourdes. Lourdes, can we talk a little bit about transportation? What insurance policies can we adopt in order to have better, more secure transportation of pesticides?
Yeah, so transportation is a very important topic because we're constantly transporting pesticides and chemicals that we use in the farm back and forth from one place to the other. So it's important to have safety measures in order to avoid a spillage in case of an accident or to avoid exposure to these chemicals. The first thing I would like to talk about is we should transport pesticides outside of the vehicle cab. We should never have them on our passenger seat. We should never leave our pesticides unattended, and that is because there is a risk of injury if we end up having a accident or we end up passing out or anything like that. There's a huge risk of injury to us and also to other people that may be involved. Also, it is very difficult to remove the chemicals from a car if they are spilled. Okay, the seats can have absorbent materials that can absorb all that, and it will be really difficult to remove that or clean that properly to be able to reuse the vehicle again. And also, let's say we don't have an accident, we get to our destination safe and sound, we can still be exposed to the hazardous fumes that the chemicals can be expelling. Then we should always remember to secure our pesticides while transporting them. Make sure that we are protecting them from any tears and any impacts that they might have in the way. And also we have to remember not to stack containers higher than the sides of the vehicle, because obviously if we are in the street, it can fall and it can cause an accident or an exposure of some kind.
I'm thinking about that, and we talked a little bit earlier about, the fact that a lot of our transportation vehicles don't have sides on their beds; they're just a flat bed, and how we see on the road that people are stacking stuff regardless. So that's something good to know. The other thing that I'm thinking about is tying them down with this ropes and this tie down mechanisms that we see regularly, how much pressure they're exerting on plastic, and how that can crack the containers.
Right.
So those are some of the things that I'm studying up in my head while you're talking, but I'm
Right.
listening to you.
Well, also, we have to remember we work with the equipment that we have in our hands, right? We make the best out of that, but it's almost kind of like have a little bit of common sense, or enough common sense to know that, okay, if I put this here and it's not very well placed and it's not secured, it can fall.
And that extra trip might be worth it if we're not having an accident by just gambling
Exactly.
too heavy.
Exactly. Also, in transportation, we should always carry with us the labels of the chemicals that we're transporting or the pesticides, and a safety data sheet. This is because if you have an accident or an exposure, the emergency personnel needs to know what you've been intoxicated with in order to treat you properly. So we always should make sure that we have that in our hands, or in a place that we can easily access.
So thinking about that as well, I'm riding down or the highway 17 here, and I'm going at 70 miles an hour, and I have a little piece of paper that's stuck to the container. What are the odds of that piece of plastic just blowing away in the wind? Pretty high, right? So I'm just thinking about practical stuff that you're talking about, that it's on the book, that we don't think about when we're just on a rush to get from point A to point B.
Exactly. And lastly, we should always protect our pesticides from extreme temperatures. This is because, first of all, like I said, these chemicals can volatilize. So basically, that's what we were talking about earlier. You can be exposed because of these vapors that they exude. And also, they decrease effectiveness in the products, which obviously we don't want.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we don't want our containers to break. It could be a glass container, it could be plastic container, but you don't want that plastic to melt. You don't want that glass to break, because remember, those chemicals are reacting inside of that, and the heat could be a very strong factor for that reaction. So always make sure you protect them from extreme temperatures.
And then when it's too hot, those vapors are going to build pressure
Exactly.
inside
It can
that
explode.
that container. Right. That's what you're talking about.
Yes.
All right, awesome. All right, so Luis, let's talk about storage. What measures do we have to take into account when we're storing these pesticide containers with the pesticide in it?
So the first thing we need to know about storage or the storage of pesticides is that we always have to have a designated area just for the pesticide. What I mean by that is that do not put any fertilizer where you store pesticide, any animal feed, or any other materials that are not pesticide. So this designated area is just for the pesticide. And this area has to have a sign that basically indicates to any employee or any person that this is where the pesticides are being stored. This area has to be closed and only allow the entry of authorized personnel only. So the only people that are going to be entering there are just people that are being trained and know how to handle this pesticide. Something else to know is that inside that storage area, we should never store any kind of PPEs, any kind of personal protective equipment in there, because as Lourdes was just mentioning, some of these pesticides can make vapors and stuff like that, and then we are contaminating that PPE inside a storage area. And some people actually do that because some of the pesticide you need to, even just to grab the container, you have to have the PPE on. The solution for this is to put the PPE somewhere near the storage area but not inside the storage area to avoid any contamination between these PPEs. The other thing, as Lourdes mentioned, as we need to control extreme temperatures when we transporting pesticide, we also need to control extreme temperatures when we store pesticide. So this means that make sure that that storage area is well ventilated. Make sure that they don't have any direct light, because obviously the more light they're receiving, the more hot it could get. And some of these pesticide, depending on how high that temperature is, they can combust and make a reaction, and we don't want to have any accident inside that storage area. Important is that we should only store the pesticide on the original container. Make sure that you always have the original container with its label on it. And when I'm talking about the label, it has to be a well-read label that somebody can read it. If you have some label that you cannot read clearly, then switch that label for a new one from the same pesticide, obviously. Basically, if you have an accident and some container breaks down, then you can switch it to another container. Make sure it's a container chemically resistant, but make sure that then you attach the correct label to that pesticide. So if you don't have to, don't do that and store it in the original container, but accidents happen and then we need to look for solutions. It is important to always notify the fire departments or your local fire department where that storage area is located and has a contingency plan in your facility in case some accident may happen. And that notification of the fire department is part of that contingency plan. So that way, something happened, the fire department knows where to look and where to go in case of an accident. It is very important that inside your storage area, the shelf that you're using has to be chemical resistant materials like stainless steel or metals. Do not use wood because the wood can actually absorb those pesticides and then you have pesticide particles around your storage area. Also, the floor of your pesticide storage room has to be also from chemical resistant. If you have concrete, then make sure that you are applying some kind of paint, chemical resistant paint, so that doesn't leach out to the ground. Then it is recommended to always store only the pesticides that are needed. So if you're gonna be using this amount of pesticide during this week, try to store only the amount. I know that that's not always practical, but in the companies that can actually just store a amount of pesticide only, that's the best way to do, because you basically lower the risk of any accident having less amount of pesticide in the storage area. And at the end of the day, make sure that you're keeping records and you know what you have there. That's not only gonna tell you how many pesticides you're storing, but how many pesticides you may need in the future, and make sure that you keep these records at least 2 years.
Okay, awesome. All right, let's talk about disposal of the pesticide containers and of the chemicals themselves. What precautions and measures do we have to go through, Aja?
Okay. So you've made this application, so now you have some empty containers, and you may even have a little bit of mix left in your tank, right? So what do we do with this sort of stuff? The mix in your tank, if you can go ahead and apply that to your crop that you have, go ahead and do that so that can be disposed of. If you cannot, then you'll have to empty out that tank and dispose of it as a hazardous material. Now, when we're talking about the different containers, there are bags, boxes, mini totes, gallon containers made of plastic, that sort of thing. Some of those can be rinsed and some of them cannot. So if you have something that can be rinsed, what we recommend and what the labels recommend are that you triple rinse the container. And that's to get the most amount of the pesticide out of that container. And then you can use that rinseate in your tank. So you can go ahead and put that in before you do your application. And after you're done rinsing out that container, it's a good idea to cut it or make it unusable in some way, shape, or form. And then you can dispose of that container in landfill or whatever the label recommends. Now, there's also another way of rinsing the container, and that's called a pressure rinse. So that's with a specialized adapter that has not only a pressurized type nozzle on it, but it also can be used to puncture the container, so it's really doing double duty. It's making it unusable as well as rinsing it out. Sometimes it may say on the pesticide label if you can burn the container. That's going to be, of course, regulated by local ordinances as well, if you're allowed to burn or whatnot. And then some of those containers, like those mini totes where they're larger, may be able to be sent back to the manufacturer to be reused again. So again, everything is on the label as far as disposal recommendations for that particular product in that particular container. So make sure you read that, and if you have any questions, give us a call.
So if they want more information on those local ordinances, local pesticide storage areas or disposal areas, they can talk to their municipality or their county government, and they can get more information on what to do, right?
Right, exactly. Because like sometimes the label will say recycle container if it's available. You may not have the container recycling program in your area, so it may just have to go with. So that's an example.
Okay. Thank you guys for explaining Chapter 8. Again, we're talking about minimizing the impact of our pesticide applications, being responsible and being proactive when it comes to storage, transportation, and disposal of our chemical containers. Something that is extremely important and often overlooked. Evidence is that we usually find on these pesticide amnesty days where people are bringing their containers in for disposal, we find a lot of weird stuff that shouldn't be happening, but people just forget about this, about storage and how important it is. And for that, we have this chapter that's pretty useful, quick and dirty on how we need to act and be proactive. Anyway, this has been Chapter 8. Again, contact your local extension agent for further information on storage facilities, on a field visit, and have somebody like an agriculture professional like us to help you design and implement some of these things that we've talked about in Chapter 8. This is The Right Dose. See you next time. The brands and trade names mentioned in this episode were used with the intention of education and not for marketing or advertisement.